So if you put a starving lion in the middle of this lush, beautiful orchard in Pakistan, right? Completely surrounded by ripe grapes and fresh fruits and, soft green grass. Do you know what actually happens?
I mean, I have a guess, but
Hmm.
lay it on me.
The lion dies of starvation. Like,
Yeah.
it will literally just collapse and die before taking a single bite of a grape.
Wow.
Really?
Just starves right there in the middle of all that
Mhm,
food.
right there. Because it's biologically hardwired. But a human, if you place a human in that exact same orchard with absolute freedom, they'll often build this towering fence around the fruit.
Correct.
And then they'll claim that some higher power told them not to touch it, and they'll literally starve themselves on purpose out of some like twisted sense of moral superiority.
Yeah, that's incredibly bleak, but also entirely accurate.
It is. And today we're doing a deep dive into this staggering psychological dynamic that honestly, it dictates almost everything you do. Like your entire relationship with rules.
And it's a dynamic that is just, well, it's defined by complete contradiction, isn't it?
Mhm. Oh, totally.
Because we are fundamentally obsessed with our own autonomy. We rebel against authority. We hate being told what to do. And we're constantly pushing against the structural parameters of our lives.
We hate the rules until we don't.
Exactly. There's this fascinating phenomenon, and it's a huge thematic thread in the source material we're looking at today, which reveals that we only push those boundaries up to the point of critical failure.
Right. It's like this ultimate protocol of crisis management. People will just sprint blindly past every single warning sign, completely ignoring the rules of the game
Yep.
until the system just completely crashes. And only then, like when they are entirely overwhelmed by the wreckage of their own actions, do they look up and scream for a referee.
We only want the rules back when we're losing the game.
Exactly. We are terrified of the chaos we create, which forces us to ask the really big foundational question today: who actually has the moral right to write those rules in the first place?
And why is our very first instinct, the second we get total freedom, to immediately start constructing these little cages for ourselves?
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are spending our time today unpacking this really profound philosophical framework. It's based on an ancient text, specifically a lecture that analyzes Surah Yunus, verses 59 through 63 from the Quran.
It's a really dense, fascinating piece of material.
It is. But before we get deep into the weeds on the mechanics of this, I do need to set a hard ground rule for you listening right now.
Yeah, quick disclaimer.
Right. We are exploring these sources today strictly as a conceptual and like a psychological framework. We are definitely not here to preach at you.
Not at all.
We aren't taking sides on any political, theological, or, religious lines. We're not endorsing specific viewpoints. Our goal is just purely to report on the incredibly thought-provoking ideas in this material and do it impartially.
Because honestly, whether you're a deeply religious person or a strict atheist or, a philosopher,
Or just a manager trying to figure out why your team at work acts the way they do.
exactly. The insights here regarding human free will and this whole crisis of authority, they are just staggering.
So let's jump in. The lecture actually begins by highlighting this really bizarre paradox in our psychology.
Yeah, and it's found in the transition between two very specific verses in the text. So verse 58 describes the arrival of this ultimate guidance, this framework for living, and it frames it as a moment of immense, almost overwhelming joy.
Right, like a massive celebration.
Yes, the text essentially says, you have been given something better than all the wealth you could possibly hoard. Go celebrate it. It's positioned as this ultimate liberation, like a giant exhale for all of humanity.
So it's like you're handed the master key to this sprawling infinite mansion.
That's a great way to put it.
But then, instead of exploring the mansion, the very next verse, verse 59, just shifts gears entirely. It goes into this razor-sharp critique of human behavior.
It's a total pivot. It asks, why are you making up your own lists of what is permitted and forbidden?
Right, and the terminology used in the text is halal for permitted and haram for forbidden.
Right, and the text is calling out the fact that the instant we are given this massive, liberating space, our first instinct is to run into the smallest little bedroom and start installing extra padlocks on the door.
It makes no sense. Why does the human mind do that? If we hate rules so much, why are we inventing new ones just to restrict ourselves?
Well, according to the framework, it's because absolute freedom is genuinely terrifying to the human ego.
Terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. When a framework says, hey, here are a few absolute essential boundaries, but inside of those, you have total autonomy, the mind actually struggles to process the vast extent of that responsibility.
Ah, so it's a coping mechanism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The text argues that we often confuse righteousness or, like, spirituality with self-deprivation.
Oh, wow.
We
Yeah.
just arbitrarily declare things lawful or unlawful based entirely on our personal tastes or cultural biases or just the societal pressures of the moment.
And then, and I think this is the really critical mechanism of the ego, we falsely attribute those made-up rules to a higher power.
Yes. We legitimize our own anxieties by pretending they are these divine mandates.
Think about how this manifests even totally outside of religion. Like, look at modern diet culture.
A perfect example. Or hustle culture.
Right. People don't just want to eat healthy, They want some wellness guru to decree that eating a specific type of chia seed at exactly 3:14 p.m. is like a universal moral imperative.
And that eating a single piece of bread is a fundamental sin against your body.
Exactly. We create these hyper-strict morning routines. Like if you don't wake up at 4 a.m. and plunge yourself into a tub of freezing ice water, you are somehow fundamentally failing at existence.
We love restricting ourselves because following a hypermanaged checklist gives us this illusion of control.
It really is an illusion, isn't it?
It is deeply ingrained. Because if I build a cage of, say, 100 arbitrary microscopic rules for myself, I never actually have to face the immense, crushing weight of navigating my actual freedom.
Right. I'm safe inside my little checklist.
Exactly.
Right.
And the source material is fiercely critiquing this behavior. It's challenging the reader, asking, why are you huddled in a self-imposed corner when you were just granted a wide-open field?
Because true guidance is meant to be a festival of relief.
Not a tightening noose.
But, okay, let me push back on this a bit. Isn't there a valid argument that humans kind of need that level of granular restriction?
How do you mean?
Like, if we don't build those cages, don't we just inevitably devolve back into animals operating on pure destructive impulse?
See, that is exactly where the text draws a massive distinction between humans and the rest of the natural world, which actually brings us right back to your starving lion in the orchard.
Right, the lion with the grapes.
Yeah. The reason the lion will die of starvation amidst all that bounty is because nature has placed an inescapable biological control on the animal.
It literally cannot eat the grapes.
No, the lion does not sit down and philosophize about its dietary choices.
Should I go plant-based today?
Right, exactly. It doesn't experience the anxiety of deciding its lifestyle. The biological autopilot is absolute.
It's locked into a single behavioral script.
Yes, and humans. We are completely stripped of that biological autopilot.
Wow.
The text introduces this concept of ikhtiar, which translates to absolute free will and intention. God or nature basically remove the guardrails for us.
So we are the only creatures on Earth with the bandwidth to consciously act against our own survival.
Precisely. We can choose to starve in a grocery store, we can choose to build something incredibly beautiful, or we can choose to burn our own house down to the ground.
That is a terrifying amount of power. But the text frames this lack of autopilot as a profound honor, doesn't it?
It does. The source actually calls it sharaf-e-insaniyat, the ultimate dignity of humanity.
The dignity of humanity. I love that phrasing.
It means we are not robots. We aren't bound by the unthinking instinct that governs the lion or, the gravity that forces water down a mountain.
We have agency.
Yes. The dignity of humanity is entirely located in the power of choice. But, and this is a massive but, you cannot separate the dignity from the burden.
Because every single day, from the literal moment you wake up, you are confronted with the reality of your own agency. You actually have to make decisions.
It's exhausting.
It's like standing at a massive control panel with a million unlabeled buttons.
Right.
The lion only has one button, and it just lights up automatically when it's hungry or threatened. We have to decide which sequences to press in what order.
And we know that hitting the wrong sequence could completely destroy our lives.
Exactly. And the terror of that control panel is exactly what drives us to invent those self-imposed cages we talked about.
We want someone else to take the wheel.
We want a guru or a politician or a self-help author to just come in and tape over half the buttons so we don't have to look at them anymore. We're constantly trying to hand our ikhtiar, our free will, back.
And the problem is, we usually try to hand it back to other humans, which leads to an inevitable collision.
Because there are 8 billion of us.
Right. There are 8 billion of us standing at our respective control panels, all possessing this incredible dignity of free will, all making choices.
And when your free will crashes into my free will, a crisis occurs.
We clearly need rules to prevent mutual destruction. But this triggers the ultimate philosophical crisis presented in the lecture. Who possesses the legitimate authority to draw the line?
Oh, this is the big one. Because if we all possess equal free will, mathematically speaking, no single human is fundamentally above any other human. We are all on the exact same horizontal plane.
Exactly. And the text makes a really radical argument about human equality based on this very premise.
Let's unpack that.
So, if every single human is born with equal ikhtiar, equal free will and intention, then absolutely no human has the inherent moral right to restrict the freedom of another human.
None.
None. The moment a human who is made of the same flesh, the same blood, the same flaws and biases as you tries to dictate absolute moral boundaries to another, the human ego inherently rebels.
The ego just screams, "Who are you to tell me what to do?" And we see this every single day. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a boss dictating how you should dress at the office or a politician telling you how to live your life.
Right.
The immediate psychological reaction is resistance. And not even because the rule is necessarily bad, but because the source of the rule is just another flawed human being.
And the text argues this resistance is actually a natural, healthy defense of your sharaf insanya, your human dignity.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. Your ego is asking, why should your will supersede mine? Why should your arbitrary preferences dictate my absolute boundaries?
Okay, I have a massive problem with this logic, though.
Lay it on me.
If we accept the premise that no human can restrict another human without violating their inherent dignity, society basically collapses in about 5 minutes.
It does seem that way.
Like, what does this text say about parliaments? What about democracies? I mean, the entire concept of the social contract is that we voluntarily surrender a portion of our freedom to elected humans to make laws so we don't end up in a chaotic bloodbath. Aren't we consenting to be governed?
That is the crucial question. And the lecture spends significant time unpacking the text's view on sovereignty, which addresses this exact problem.
Okay, how does it resolve the parliament issue?
The framework makes a really crucial distinction between administrative rules and absolute moral authority.
Administrative versus moral. Got it.
So a parliament of 500 people, representing 150 million citizens, is perfectly equipped to make administrative decisions.
Like deciding which side of the road we drive on?
Exactly. Or how taxes are collected for infrastructure, or what zoning laws make sense for a growing city. Those are logistical agreements. They are necessary for shared survival.
Okay, so logistical rules are totally fine. But where does the text draw the line on human authority?
The line is drawn at absolute moral sovereignty.
What does that look like in practice?
It means if a human institution acts with absolute authority, declaring things fundamentally right or wrong, fundamentally lawful or unlawful, based purely on their own whims or societal trends, or even a majority vote.
And they act as if they're accountable to no higher objective truth.
Yes. The text equates this to a modern form of idol worship.
Whoa. Calling a parliament idol worship is incredibly severe.
It is a heavy accusation.
Because when people hear idol worship, they picture, ancient civilizations bowing to statues of stone or gold. They don't picture politicians in suits passing a bill.
Right. But the text isn't talking about statues. It's talking about unchecked ego and materialism.
Oh, I see.
If a human institution positions itself as the ultimate, final authority on morality, with no accountability to a higher system, they are effectively positioning themselves as gods over other humans.
They are demanding the kind of submission that violates the very dignity we just discussed.
Exactly. And the framework argues that only a supreme creator, an entity entirely above the human level, completely devoid of biological needs, human biases, or political ambitions, has the legitimate right to draw the definitive moral boundaries of human behavior.
The logic there is fascinating, actually.
How so?
Well, if a supreme creator draws the out-of-bounds lines, the human ego doesn't have to feel humiliated by submitting to them.
Right.
You aren't bowing to your neighbor or to a politician who is just as flawed and messed up as you are. You are aligning yourself with the architect of the universe. It protects you from the tyranny of other humans.
That is exactly the point. It is the ultimate preservation of human dignity. And the source material goes out of its way to illustrate just how universally strict this principle is.
How strict are we talking?
It states that even the prophets themselves, The very individuals tasked with delivering these divine messages did not possess the authority to invent new rules or restrict human freedom.
Okay, wait, that completely upends the historical assumption most people have about religious figures.
Totally.
I mean, the common cultural view is that prophets were the ultimate lawmakers, like dictating every tiny aspect of their followers' lives.
But the lecture highlights a specific historical anecdote referenced in the text where a prophet is actually corrected by the divine.
Corrected. For what?
The prophet had prohibited himself from something entirely lawful, something completely harmless, and he did it merely to appease the social pressures of some people around him.
Just trying to keep the peace.
Right. But the divine response in the text was swift and definitive. It basically said, why are you making unlawful what God has made lawful?
Wow. So even the messenger isn't allowed to shrink the field.
Exactly. The point being established here is that the law is supreme, and it sits above everyone, including the absolute highest spiritual figures in human history.
A prophet is a messenger of the boundaries, not the author of them.
Beautifully said. No human, no matter how elevated or revered, is permitted to arbitrarily construct cages for other humans.
Okay, I love that concept because it really protects us from human dictators. But it raises an entirely new anxiety for me.
Oh, what's the new anxiety?
Well, if this supreme creator is setting the rules and the rules are absolute and final, aren't we just trading human tyrants for a cosmic micromanager?
A cosmic micromanager.
Yeah. It sounds like we're constantly being surveilled from the sky, just terrified to make a move. How does this framework allow for actual lived freedom?
That is the perfect question. And the text anticipates that exact fear. It provides a really profound analogy to explain the mechanics of how divine boundaries actually operate.
Okay, I'm ready.
The concept used in the text is Hudud Allah, which translates to the limits or boundaries of God. And to understand how they function, the lecture asks us to picture a massive sports stadium.
All right, I'm picturing an enormous field, players, a ball, fans screaming in the stands.
Perfect. Now, if you attempt to play a really high-stakes game in that stadium with no out-of-bounds lines, no rules of engagement, and absolutely no referee,
Bro,
what happens?
it doesn't result in a fun, liberated game. It results in pure, unadulterated chaos.
Exactly. Players clash, arguments break out, and eventually the game devolves into physical violence.
Without structural integrity, the game just destroys itself. I mean, your freedom to swing your arms ends where my nose begins, right? Without rules, the strongest players just brutalize the weaker ones.
But consider how a truly excellent referee operates within that stadium.
Okay.
A good referee does not run out onto the field and play the game for you.
No, that would be ridiculous.
They do not hover over your shoulder, telling you how to pass the ball, what offensive strategy to deploy, or how to celebrate when you score a point.
They're essentially invisible until they're needed.
Exactly. They are completely 100% hands-off regarding the execution of the game. They only blow the whistle when you step on the out-of-bounds line or when you commit a foul that actively harms another player.
It's the ultimate bowling with the bumpers up scenario.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Like you can approach the lane however you want. You can throw the ball at 100 miles an hour. You can throw it painfully slow. You can spin it backward between your legs.
The bumpers do not care about your technique.
They do not micromanage your throw at all. They exist solely to ensure the ball doesn't go entirely into the gutter.
The bumpers protect the integrity of the roll. And this is exactly how Hudud Allah is described in the text. They are the out-of-bounds lines of human existence.
So inside that field, anything goes.
Inside that incredibly massive field, you are granted total, unbridled freedom to invent, to build complex societies, to develop technology, art, culture, and science. The higher authority is not micromanaging your every step.
That's a huge relief.
In fact, the text implies that the actual divinely mandated rules are surprisingly few. They're only the absolute parameters required to ensure that the grand game of human civilization doesn't devolve into mutual destruction.
Which brings us directly back to that psychology of crisis we opened the show with.
Yes, the protocol of crisis.
Because we are out on that massive field playing the game. And because of our ego, because we want absolute control, we constantly push the limits.
They step out of bounds constantly.
We ignore the referee's whistle. We think the bumpers are ruining our fun. We just dismantle the rules because we think we know better.
And it's only when the game turns into a violent brawl, when the economy collapses, when societies just fracture completely.
When we hit that critical failure, that is when we look up at the sky and say, we need order. Someone fix this system.
We resent the referee until we're the one being fouled.
Wow. We resent the referee until we're the one being fouled. That is so true.
The boundaries are not designed to restrict human joy or stifle progress.
Hmm.
They are structural, load-bearing walls designed to protect the integrity of the game so you can actually keep playing.
And to ensure that this vast playing field remains open forever, I know the text introduces another vital mechanism,
Yes.
the concept of the seal of prophethood, or Khatm-e-Nubuwwat.
Right.
How does that theological concept function practically in this framework? Like, what does a seal have to do with the stadium analogy?
In the context of this philosophy, the seal of prophethood means that the rules of the game are permanently locked in. The era of divine revelation is sealed.
Locked in.
The out-of-bounds markers have been set down, the field is clearly defined, and those lines will never, ever change.
But wait, society evolves, right? Technology evolves. Why wouldn't the rules need to be updated by new prophets or new divine leaders?
Because if the rules could be constantly updated, you would live in perpetual fear of the field shrinking.
Oh.
The seal acts as an ultimate anti-tampering mechanism against human tyranny. It means that no new human leader, no future king, no charismatic philosopher, and no parliament can ever come along and claim, I have received new divine authority to shrink your field.
Or, I am moving the goalposts and you must obey me.
Exactly.
I see the profound sociological implication there. If the divine lines are permanently sealed, it completely strips the power away from future megalomaniacs who try to use religion or absolute morality to enslave people.
Yes, if a cult leader or a tyrant tries to invent a new moral cage, the population can look at the sealed rulebook and say, no, the lines are already drawn. You have no authority here.
It is an eternal guarantee of human freedom.
It fundamentally decentralizes power. The field is set forever. You never have to wake up anxious that your lifestyle will be arbitrarily declared unlawful tomorrow by someone claiming a new connection to the divine.
You are protected from the whims of men.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have the dignity of our free will. We have this massive protected playing field. We have clear out-of-bounds lines. And we have a hands-off referee.
It's a great setup.
But every game eventually ends. The stadium lights have to turn off.
They do.
And this forces us to look at the end game presented in the text, the concept of accountability. How does the judgment of this game actually function?
Right, because the cultural assumption of a day of judgment is usually this terrifying, chaotic courtroom scene.
Oh, yeah. The cultural imagination heavily leans into the courtroom drama. People picture, a distant, intimidating venue, the wooden benches, the gavel.
You're standing before a wrathful judge, just hoping your paperwork didn't get lost in the cosmic bureaucracy.
Exactly. Maybe you're hoping you can call witnesses to explain your side of the story, or find some clever way to plea bargain your way out of the consequences of stepping out of bounds.
But the text aggressively rejects this bureaucratic imagery.
It does.
Entirely. It paints a deeply intimate, almost inescapable picture of accountability, centering around a concept called the Kitabi-Mubin,
Kitabi-Mubin.
which translates to a clear book or a manifest ledger.
A clear book. How does that practically differ from a cosmic courtroom?
Well, the text describes a scenario where your personal ledger, the exhaustive record of your life, your actions, and most importantly, the hidden intentions behind those actions, is physically tied to your own neck.
The tinky neck.
It is entirely yours.
Okay.
It hasn't been handled by lawyers or prosecutors. When the moment of accountability arrives, that ledger is simply unfurled before you.
Okay.
You are not brought before a mysterious third party who might have misunderstood your context. You are simply handed the book and given a single directive.
Which is?
Read your own record.
Read your own record. Man, the psychological weight of that phrase is staggering.
It really is. It removes all external arbitration. You become your own accountant and your own judge.
Why?
Because you are the one granted ikhtiar, you possess the absolute free will, therefore you are the sole author of every single word in that ledger. You made the choices.
But human beings are masters of self-deception.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
justify our terrible behavior every single day. If I act selfishly, my brain immediately creates this narrative about why I was tired, or how the other person totally deserved it, or how the circumstances forced my hand.
Right.
We lie to ourselves constantly to protect our egos. How can we possibly be trusted to be our own judge?
Because the concept of the clear book implies the total removal of that cognitive dissonance.
It gets stripped away.
Violently stripped away. In that moment, your conscience is fully awakened and cleared of all the worldly illusions, all the justifications, and all the defensive narratives you relied on during the game.
So no more excuses.
None. You will look at the out-of-bounds lines. You will look precisely at where you deliberately stepped over them, and you will see the exact intention in your heart when you did it.
Wow.
The judgment won't be imposed on you. It will be self-evident. You won't be able to argue with the author of the book because the author is you.
I am going to be entirely honest. That sounds far more terrifying than a wrathful judge.
Does it?
Yes. A wrathful judge I might be able to trick, or at least I could blame them for being unfair. But the unvarnished, undeniable truth of my own hypocrisy, that is paralyzing.
It's a mirror you can't look away from.
Imagine having your permanent internet search history, your deepest, darkest, most petty thoughts, and every single time you manipulated someone for your own gain, broadcast directly into your unclouded consciousness.
It's a heavy.
If I deeply internalize that every single step I take on this field is being permanently recorded for a self-judging ledger, how do I ever leave my house?
Right.
Doesn't this framework of hyper-accountability just create a society paralyzed by existential dread?
It is the most rational psychological reaction to have. If you recognize the presence of the referee, and you know the out-of-bounds lines carry internal consequences in a ledger tied to your neck,
Yeah.
how do your knees not buckle when you walk into the field?
Exactly.
Well, the source text is intensely aware of this paralysis. It knows that fear can be just as restrictive as the arbitrary cages we build.
So how does it resolve the dread? I need this metaphor because the ledger tied to the neck is a heavy concept to carry around.
The text introduces the concept of taqwa.
Taqwa.
Now, if you look up taqwa in an English translation, you'll usually see words like piety, righteousness, or fear of God.
Right, very standard religious terms.
But those translations are remarkably clunky. They carry all this heavy religious baggage and entirely miss the nuanced psychology of the word.
So what's the actual psychology?
To explain the functional reality of taqwa, the lecture recounts a brilliant historical exchange. It involves Caliph Umar, who was one of the most prominent early leaders in Islamic history. Umar sought a practical definition, so he asked a Bedouin to explain what taqwa actually feels like.
A Bedouin. So a man who lived his entire life navigating the harsh, unforgiving, rugged terrain of the desert.
Exactly. He asked this man of the desert for a definition.
Well, a man of the desert is not going to give a theoretical, academic answer. What did the Bedouin say?
He answered the caliph with a question of his own. He asked Umar, "Have you ever had to walk through a narrow path completely covered in sharp, thorny bushes?
Anyone who has ever been hiking knows exactly what that looks like.
You're surrounded by briars, and every movement threatens to snag your clothes or tear your skin."
Precisely. Caliph Umar replied, yes, of course. So the Bedouin asked the pivotal question, how do you do it? How do you move through the thorns?
Which forces us to consider the options.
Right.
When you face a thorny path, what is the protocol?
Right.
You don't freeze in terror and refuse to take another step, paralyzed by the fear of getting scratched.
No.
You also don't sit down in the dirt and weep about how unfair the thorns are.
And you certainly don't try to burn the entire forest to the ground just to clear a path.
Exactly. You adapt to the environment. You pull your clothes in incredibly tight against your body. You lower your center of gravity.
You become hyper-focused on exactly where you are placing your feet. You navigate the hazards carefully so you don't get snagged, but you keep moving forward.
And that was the Bedouin's exact answer. He said, you gather your clothes tight around you, watch your step, and navigate through safely.
I love that.
That, the text explains, is the essence of taqwa. It is not paralyzing fear. It is supreme, active mindfulness.
Active mindfulness.
It is the practice of moving through a messy, complicated, hazardous world with deep intention and acute situational awareness.
I really cannot overstate how much I love that reframing.
It changes everything, right?
It totally shatters the idea that being good means locking yourself in a sterile, padded room to avoid ever committing a sin.
Right.
It destroys the concept of the monk retreating to a mountaintop monastery where there are zero choices to make and therefore zero chances to step out of bounds.
This framework is demanding that you stay in the game.
It demands that you exist right in the middle of the messy, beautiful, thorny, real world. You are interacting with society, you're in business, you have relationships.
And taqwa is just having the situational awareness for your soul to navigate it without tearing yourself apart. It is the absolute antidote to paralysis. You are an active participant on the field, you are running with the ball, but you are profoundly mindful of where the sidelines are.
You don't have to live in terror of the referee, you simply have to pay attention to the game.
Yes. The thorns represent the temptations, the ethical shortcuts, the moments where you might be tempted to misuse your immense free will to exploit someone else or degrade your own dignity.
And Taqwa is the practice grace of recognizing the thorn and
Yeah.
actively choosing to step around it.
Beautifully said.
And if we tie this all the way back to the protocol of crisis we discussed at the very beginning,
Do that.
the people who hit critical failure, the ones whose lives collapse until they are begging the system to save them, those are the people sprinting blindly through the thorn.
Oh, exactly. They aren't paying attention.
They are wildly swinging their arms, getting cut up, destroying their relationships, stepping way out of bounds, and then they are shocked, genuinely shocked, when the game stops being fun.
But if you walk mindfully, you preempt the crisis. You don't need the system to rescue you because you didn't crash your life into a wall.
The mindfulness prevents the systemic collapse.
The text doesn't stop at mere prevention. It asks a final, vital question. What is the ultimate psychological payoff for living this way?
What do you actually get out of it?
Right. If you accept the crushing dignity of your free will, if you respect the divine referee's out-of-bounds lines instead of inventing your own cages, and if you walk mindfully through the thorns of life, what state of being do you actually achieve?
Does it offer a tangible reward here in the present? Or is it all just about hoping your ledger looks good at the end of the game?
The reward is immediate, and it is deeply psychological.
Hmm.
The text delivers a profound conclusion by fundamentally redefining a very famous term in the source language.
Which term?
Awliya Allah.
Awliya Allah. Culturally, that term carries a massive amount of weight.
Huge weight.
It is almost always translated as saints or the friends of God. And usually when society uses that term, they are talking about untouchable, mystical figures.
Right, people who perform miracles, who levitate, or the historical saints whose shrines people visit to ask for blessings.
It implies an exclusive VIP club of spiritual titans, like totally out of reach for a normal person.
The cultural assumption is exactly that an elite, magical tier of human beings completely detached from normal reality. But the source text aggressively attacks and dismantles this cultural assumption.
Really? How?
It democratizes the term entirely. It strips away the mysticism and states plainly that an Awliya Allah, a true friend or protege of the divine, is not a magical being.
Okay, then who is it?
It is simply anyone who believes in the boundaries and walks mindfully through the thorns. Anyone who cultivates that situational awareness, the Taqwa, achieves this status.
Wow. That is a massive paradigm shift.
It changes everything.
It means the person listening to this audio right now, stuck in morning traffic on their way to a stressful job, can achieve that status.
Yes.
It could be an exhausted parent trying to raise their kids right. It could be an engineer, a nurse, a teacher. It is anyone who simply moves with intention and respects the rules of the grand game.
You don't need a shrine. You just need mindfulness. It is accessible to every single human possessing free will.
So what is the psychological state that these mindful individuals achieve?
It's summarized in one of the most powerful recurring phrases in the text. La khafun alayhim wa la hum yazanun.
Which translates to?
They shall have no fear, and they shall not grieve.
No fear and no grief.
None.
I mean, to claim a life completely devoid of fear and grief seems almost impossibly utopian. How does the text justify that?
The lecture justifies it by contrasting this mindful state with the dominant modern psychological crisis, which the text refers to as huzn.
Huzn? What is that?
Huzn is a deep, internal, persistent grief or depression. The expert describes it as the quintessential modern condition.
How does it look?
Well, you have an individual who possesses immense material wealth, unprecedented technological convenience, and total autonomy. They're smiling in all their photographs, they're attending all the right social events.
But internally?
Internally, they're sinking in an ocean of despair.
Because they have no anchor.
Exactly.
When you have absolute freedom but you don't know where the out-of-bounds lines are, every single choice is terrifying. You are paralyzed by decision fatigue.
You are constantly afraid of making the wrong move and ruining your life.
Because you don't actually know the rules of the game you're playing.
Precisely that. The anxiety of the unknown future is what generates fear. And the regret over past mistakes made while wandering blindly without a map is what generates grief.
So by accepting the ultimate divinely mandated boundaries, you eradicate the source of both.
Yeah.
I see the mechanics of it now. By acknowledging that there is a supreme referee and that the rules are fixed and sealed forever, you free yourself from the anxiety of the unknown.
You don't have to fear the future because you know exactly where the safety parameters are.
And you free yourself from the crushing weight of the past, the grief, because you know you are playing within a system designed by a creator who deeply understands your flawed nature.
When you trust the structural integrity of the field, you can finally exhale.
Yeah.
You don't have to be paralyzed by the ledger tied to your neck because you are actively mindfully managing it. Will you make mistakes? Absolutely.
Will you occasionally step on a thorn?
Yes, because you are human. But when you do, you don't collapse into an existential crisis. You adjust your posture, you pull your clothes a little tighter, and you keep walking.
You are liberated from the tyranny of other humans trying to dictate your morality.
And you are liberated from the dizzying dread of absolute directionless freedom.
By submitting to the ultimate rules of the game, you are finally free to actually play it.
It's beautiful.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking at that terrifying paradox of absolute freedom and how it inevitably triggers a crisis where we literally beg for the system to intervene.
We unpack the immense, heavy dignity of human free will.
The reality that we are not lions on autopilot, but creatures burdened with the power of choice.
We explored the absolute necessity of a supreme divine referee to protect us from the ego and tyranny of other humans trying to act like gods.
We discussed the unchangeable, sealed boundaries of the playing field, the profound, inescapable self-accountability of the clear book tied to our necks, and finally, the deeply practical mindfulness of walking through the thorns.
All to reach a psychological state entirely free of fear and grief. It is a stunning philosophical arc.
It takes the listener from the self-imposed cages we build out of anxiety, all the way to ultimate psychological liberation through mindful submission to objective truth.
It really is a masterclass in the psychology of human behavior.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Go for it.
We have spent this entire time talking about ultimate divine boundaries, the massive cosmic parameters meant to keep you safe and protect your human dignity. But I want you to look closely at your own life right now.
Look at the immediate walls around you.
Exactly. Think about the invisible, entirely arbitrary boundaries that dictate your daily routine. The rules drawn by your society, the expectations set by your boss, the cultural pressures of your peer group, or even the unexamined anxieties inside your own head.
How many of those arbitrary rules are you treating as if they are absolute, unbreakable laws of the universe?
How many thorns are you staring at, paralyzed, thinking you aren't allowed to just step around them? If true freedom is knowing the real rules of the grand game and recognizing who actually possesses the authority to make them, maybe it is time to take a hard look at your life and realize exactly which out-of-bounds lines you are perfectly allowed to step right over.